There are places we are not meant to go, not because of no trespassing signs or the threat of a security guard, but because some places hold on to their past so tightly that they forget how to let go. They become prisons of memory, and if you're not careful, they can trap you in there with them. I learned this lesson 3 years ago, in the silent, decaying halls of the old St. Jude's Children's Hospital, and I haven't been inside another abandoned building since. My name is Leo, or at least that's what my small community of urban explorers knew me as. For about 5 years, I ran a moderately successful YouTube channel dedicated to exploring the forgotten corners of the world. Factories reclaimed by nature, opulent mansions left to rot, forgotten Cold War bunkers. I'd seen it all, or so I thought. My whole brand was about authenticity. No fake scares, no exaggerated reactions, just me, a camera, and the heavy, oppressive silence of a place that time had left behind. My subscribers appreciated the respect I showed the locations. I was a ghost documenting other ghosts. St. Jude's was the holy grail for explorers in my state. It was a massive, sprawling complex on the outskirts of the city, shut down in the early 90s after a funding scandal and whispers of malpractice. For decades it sat there, a skeletal monument on a hill, surrounded by a chain-link fence that was more of a suggestion than a barrier. It was notorious for being difficult to get into, and even more difficult to navigate. Stories about it were a dime a dozen online. Asbestos, unstable floors, vagrants, even cult activity. But the most persistent rumor, the one that really drew me in, was about the pediatric wing. They said it was different. While the rest of the hospital succumbed to the expected decay, the children's ward was supposedly pristine, almost untouched, a pocket of unnatural preservation in a sea of rot. I dismissed it as folklore,
The kind of legend that grows around a place like that to make it more exciting. But the idea burrowed into my mind like a parasite. I spent weeks planning the expedition. I studied old floor plans, marking potential entry points on satellite maps, and read through dozens of forum posts from people who had tried and failed to get in. Most attempts were thwarted by a surprisingly diligent patrol car that circled the property at irregular intervals. Getting in wasn't just about finding a hole in the fence, it was about timing and a whole lot of luck. I felt a pull to this place, an obsession that went beyond just getting views for my channel. It felt like a final exam. I decided to go on a Tuesday, just after 2 a.m. A steady, miserable drizzle was falling, the kind that keeps people indoors and makes the world feel slick and gray. It was perfect. The rain would mask any noise I made. I parked my car 2 blocks away, killed the engine, and just sat for a minute, watching the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. This was the moment of truth. Go or no go. The familiar cocktail of fear and adrenaline was already pumping through me. I grabbed my pack, pulled on my hood, and stepped out into the night. I made my way to the weakest point in the fence I'd identified, a section behind the overgrown boiler house. The rain muffled the crunch of my boots on the gravel and the metallic groan of the fence as I peeled it back just enough to slip through. For a moment, I stood perfectly still, letting my eyes adjust to the oppressive darkness of the hospital grounds. The building loomed over me, a black silhouette against a charcoal sky, its hundreds of windows like vacant eyes. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and decay, the signature perfume of all forgotten places. But there was something else here too.
A faint, almost imperceptible scent, clean and antiseptic, like bleach. It was the first thing that felt wrong, a tiny, dissonant note in the symphony of decay. It was so out of place that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. The boiler house door was my way in. It took me a solid 10 minutes with a pry bar, my muscles straining, the screech of protesting metal sounding like a scream in the dead quiet. My heart was in my throat, convinced that the patrol car would choose this exact moment to swing around the corner. Finally, with a loud bang that made my heart hammer against my ribs, the lock gave way. I slipped inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind me, and the outside world vanished. I was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. I clicked on my headlamp,
its beam cutting a sharp white cone through the black. I was in a vast, cavernous space, filled with the hulking shapes of dead machinery. Rust-colored water dripped from pipes overhead, each drop echoing like a gunshot in the tomb-like silence. I pulled my camera out, turned it on, and started my ritual opening line. "All right, guys, we're in," I whispered, my voice sounding small and thin against the immense quiet. "This is St. Jude's. Let's see what it has for us." The first hour was standard procedure. I moved through the ground floor, documenting the decay. The emergency room was a disaster zone, with gurneys overturned and ancient medical supplies strewn across the floor, crushed underfoot. The cafeteria was a sea of shattered glass and peeling linoleum, the air thick with the smell of stale grease. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and grime, exactly as it should have been. I felt the initial knot of unease in my stomach start to loosen. The antiseptic smell was gone, replaced by the familiar scent of mold and damp concrete. The rumors were just stories after all.
This was just another dead building. According to the floor plans, the pediatric wing was on the 4th floor, in the hospital's north tower. Getting there was a challenge. The main elevators were dead, of course, their doors pried open by vandals to reveal black, empty shafts. The central stairwell was partially collapsed, a mountain of concrete and rebar blocking the way. I had to find a service staircase at the far end of the west wing. The journey took me through darkened corridors that felt like arteries in a dead leviathan. My headlamp beam danced across peeling paint, graffiti-scarred walls, and the occasional unsettling discovery. A single shoe, a child's drawing of a malformed son taped to a wall, a wheelchair sitting in the middle of a hallway, facing the wall as if in punishment. Each little vignette felt like a story I couldn't read. Finally, I reached the service stairs. They were narrow, concrete, and terrifyingly dark. Every step echoed up and down the shaft, creating a phantom companion to my ascent. I climbed, my hand trailing along the gritty wall, until I reached the door marked with a faded 4. My heart was beating a little faster now. This was it, the place from the stories. I pushed it open and stepped out, and froze. The air was different here. The musty smell of decay was gone, completely. The air was cool, dry, and clean. That faint, sterile scent of bleach was back, stronger this time, sharp and unmistakable. I swept my light across the hallway. The walls were painted a cheerful, if faded, baby blue, adorned with murals of cartoon animals. There was no graffiti, no dust blankets. The floor, a checkered pattern of pink and white tiles, was clean. Not just clear of debris, but swept. I took a hesitant step forward, my boot making a squeaking sound that was shockingly loud. It felt like a desecration. It was a time capsule.
I walked down the hall, my light revealing one impossible detail after another. I passed the nurse's station, and the countertop was clear, the phones neatly in their cradles. A clipboard with a blank patient chart was sitting perfectly aligned with the edge of the counter. I peered into the patient rooms. Each one was a perfect diorama of abandonment. A bed, a small nightstand, a single chair. But one room, at the very end of the hall, was different. The door was slightly ajar, leaking a sliver of profound darkness. I pushed it open, and my breath caught in my throat. Unlike the others, this room was furnished. There was a small, white-painted metal bed, but it wasn't empty. It was perfectly made. The crisp white sheets were tucked in with military precision, and a thick blue blanket was folded neatly at its base. On the pillow sat a small, worn-looking teddy bear. I stood in that doorway for what felt like an eternity, my brain short-circuiting as it tried to reconcile the scene with reality. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A squatter? No. This was too clean, too meticulous, too reverent. The whole floor was like a museum exhibit. There was no trash, no sleeping bags, no signs of life. Just this one perfectly preserved room, waiting for a patient who would never arrive. I took a step inside, the boundary of the doorway feeling like a tangible veil I was pushing through. The air was even colder here, and the silence was heavier, more profound than anywhere else in the hospital.
I reached out and touched the blanket on the bed. It was soft and clean. It felt like it had been taken out of a dryer just hours ago. There was no logical reason for this. None. Then, I saw the music box. It was on the nightstand next to the bed, a small, unassuming wooden box with a faded ballerina painted on the lid.
It was the kind of thing a child would treasure, its corners worn smooth from years of handling. Compelled by a force I didn't understand, I reached out, my fingers hesitating for a moment before slowly, carefully lifting the lid. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. I thought it was broken, like everything else in this hospital. Then, a series of tiny metallic notes tinkled out into the crushing silence. It was a simple, familiar lullaby, but in that place, at that time, it was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. The notes were clear and bright, not warped or slowed by age. The mechanism was new. It worked perfectly. It sounded like a tiny, captured ghost singing just for me. I slammed the lid shut, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The sudden return to silence was almost as deafening as the music had been. That's when I felt it, a feeling I'd only ever had a few times before in my most intense explorations. The unshakable, primal certainty that I was not alone. It started as a prickle on the back of my neck, the kind of static electricity you feel before a lightning strike. I swept my headlamp beam around the room, into the corners, under the bed. Nothing, just shadows that seemed to dance and retreat from the light. But the feeling intensified. It felt like a pair of eyes were on me, watching me from the darkness in the hallway I just left. My own reflection in the darkened window pane made me jump, a pale, terrified face staring back at me. I backed out of the room, my camera still recording, but feeling impossibly heavy in my hand. I swung the beam of my light down the long blue corridor. It was empty. The murals of smiling animals seemed to mock me, their painted eyes following my every move. The clean floors stretched out before me, a sterile runway into blackness. But I couldn't shake the feeling.
I started talking to my camera, my voice a strained whisper, desperate to fill the silence. Okay, I don't know what this is. Someone is here. Someone is keeping this place clean. This isn't right. I began to back away down the hall, away from the room with the music box. I didn't want to turn my back on it. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, to get out, to leave this place to its secrets. But my curiosity, the very trait that had built my channel, kept me there. I had to know. I had to have proof. As I retreated, my light caught something on the floor I had missed before. Footprints, not dusty outlines like my own, but wet prints, leading from one of the other patient rooms and heading down the hall, away from me, toward the far end of the wing. They were small, like a child's, and they were fresh, so fresh I could see the water still settling into the porous texture of the tiles. My blood ran cold. The prints were glistening in my headlamp's beam, the water still evaporating. They were made moments ago, while I was in that room, while I was mesmerized and terrified by the music box. Someone or something had been in the room right across the hall, watching me. My breath hitched, and I could hear my own ragged breathing in the microphone, a harsh, panicked sound. I followed the line of prints with my light, my heart hammering against my sternum like a trapped bird. They led down the hall and disappeared around a corner, toward what the floor plan had labeled the recreation area. And then I heard it, a sound that cut through the silence and seized my soul. It was a giggle, a child's giggle, faint, distant, but utterly unmistakable. It echoed from around the corner where the footprints had gone. It wasn't a happy sound. It was hollow, cold, and filled with a chilling sort of mischief. That was it.
Every rational thought, every shred of bravery, every bit of the detached documentarian I pretended to be, evaporated. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the camera. I didn't care about being quiet. I sprinted down that sterile blue hallway, my every rational thought, every shred of bravery, every bit of the detached documentarian I pretended to be, evaporated. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the camera. I didn't care about being quiet. I sprinted down that sterile blue hallway, my boots thudding on the clean tiles, the sound obscene in the oppressive quiet. Behind me, I heard another sound, the soft, rhythmic patter of small, running feet. Bare feet on linoleum. It was keeping pace with me. Fear gave me a speed I didn't know I possessed. I burst through the door to the service stairwell, slamming it shut behind me. I didn't wait to see if it would open again. I plunged down the concrete stairs, taking them 2 or 3 at a time, my headlamp beam a chaotic, bouncing blur of white light on gray concrete. The pattering footsteps followed, echoing in the stairwell, a terrible, frantic echo of my own. Sometimes they sounded like they were right behind me, sometimes like they were coming from below me, as if trying to cut me off. I risked a glance over my shoulder, but saw nothing but the suffocating, absolute darkness of the stairwell shaft. I reached the ground floor, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest, and shoved my way back into the main hospital corridor. I didn't know which way was out. I was disoriented, panicked. I ran blindly, my light flashing across scenes of decay that seemed to blur into a nightmare montage. Overturned gurneys, shattered windows, peeling walls. Then I heard the giggle again, much closer this time, seeming to come from just ahead of me, echoing from across corridor. I skidded to a halt, my blood turning to ice. Had it gotten ahead of me? Was it cornering me? This wasn't a chase anymore. It was a game, and I was losing. Ducked into an old operating theater, the first open door I saw, and pressed myself into the shadows behind the door, my body trembling uncontrollably. I switched off my headlamp, plunging myself into the same blackness as my pursuer. I held my breath, listening, trying to silence the frantic drumming in my ears. The patterning footsteps slowed, then stopped, just outside the operating theater. I could hear a soft, inquisitive humming, the same lullaby from the music box. It was so close, I could feel the vibrations through the concrete floor. A small shadow blotted out the faint light coming from under the door. It was standing right there. I squeezed my eyes shut, convinced this was the end, that the door would swing open and I would finally see what had been chasing me. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The humming continued, a cheerful, innocent sound that was the most malevolent thing I had ever experienced. I could hear a soft, scraping sound, like a small finger tracing the outline of the door, searching for a way in. My mind was screaming. I was paralyzed by a terror so pure, so absolute, that I couldn't even move. Then, as suddenly as it began, the humming stopped. The shadow under the door moved away. I heard the patterning footsteps again, but this time they were retreating, heading back down the hall, growing fainter and fainter until they were gone, leaving me alone in the crushing, absolute silence once more. It didn't feel like I had escaped. It felt like I had been let go. I stayed in that operating theater for at least an hour, maybe more. Time had ceased to have meaning. My entire world was the cold concrete at my back and the suffocating darkness in front of me. My body was locked in a state of primal fear. The silence that I had once found peaceful in these abandoned places now felt menacing, like a predator holding its breath.
Every drip of water, every groan of the decaying building as it settled, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through my veins, making me flinch. Eventually, the first hints of dawn began to filter through the grimy windows, casting long, skeletal shadows across the room. The faint gray light felt like a pardon. It gave me just enough courage to move. I didn't turn my camera back on. The thought of documenting anything further was repellent. I just wanted out. I crept from the operating theater like a mouse, my head on a swivel, my ears straining for the slightest sound of humming or footsteps. I retraced my steps, not by memory, but by following the trail of my own dusty footprints, a breadcrumb trail leading me out of the nightmare. It was a slow, nerve-wracking journey back to the boiler house. Every dark corridor seemed to hold a threat. Every open doorway felt like a gaping mouth ready to swallow me whole. The hospital felt different now. It no longer felt dead. It felt watchful and hungry. When I finally reached the boiler house and saw the sliver of gray light around the edges of the door I'd pried open, I nearly wept with relief. I squeezed through the gap, not even bothering to try and close it, and scrambled out into the cold, damp morning air. The rain had stopped. The world outside felt muted and surreal, the colors washed out. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the engine started. I drove away without looking back, the image of the looming, dark silhouette of St. Jude's burning in my rearview mirror. I felt its gaze on me all the way back to the highway. When I got home, I dumped my camera gear on the floor and stood under a scalding hot shower for 30 minutes, as if I could wash the feeling of that place off my skin, its invisible fingerprints.
Later that day, after hours of sitting and staring at a blank wall, I forced myself to watch the footage. It was all there. The clean hallways, the perfectly made bed, the music box. I heard my own terrified whispers, my panicked breathing as I ran. I even heard the child's giggle, faint but utterly unmistakable. But when I got to the part in the stairwell and the chase through the corridors, the audio track was clean. My footsteps, my breathing, but nothing else. The pattering, the humming, it wasn't on the recording. The camera hadn't picked it up. It was as if those sounds were meant only for me. I never posted the video. I couldn't. How could I explain it? Without the audio of the footsteps, without the sound of the humming during the chase, I just looked like a man having a severe panic attack in an empty building. People would call it fake. They would say I was a fraud. But I knew what I heard. I knew what I felt. It was real. Something was in that hospital. Something that kept the pediatric ward as a pristine, silent memorial. Something that played with me, that hunted me for sport, and then, for reasons I will never understand, let me go. I shut down my channel a week later. I just posted a short text message saying I was moving on, that the passion was gone. I couldn't bring myself to tell the truth. Who would believe me? St. Jude's still stands on that hill, a dark stain on the horizon. Sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind is blowing just right, I think I can hear a faint lullaby drifting through the air. I think about that room, the made bed, the teddy bear, the music box, and I wonder if it's still there, waiting. A perfect, clean little room in the heart of a rotting hospital, kept ready for a guest who will never, ever leave.